Okay, hi everyone. We're now going to look at our next topic, which is definite integral. Now, whenever you see a function with the integral sign and the number above and below, that is referring to the definite integral. To calculate that answer, you simply integrate the function that you're given, like normal, and that answer you get, you're going to plug these values, the upper and lower value. First, you're going to plug the upper value into your answer, then minus the lower value into that same answer. Now, it sounds a bit confusing, but just let's look at an example. Now, here I have directions. It says integrate the function, plug the upper limit, which is the top value, then evaluate. Next, plug the lower limit, which is the bottom value, then evaluate, and then you subtract both answers that you get. So here we have a function. The integral from 1 to 2 of x squared plus 2x plus 1. So first step, we're going to integrate our f of x function. So here we have our function. When we integrate, the rule says we're going to add 1 to the power, then divide by the answer we get. So if I add 1 to 2, I will get 3, and I divide by that 3. This x is the power of 1, so when I add 1 to it, I get 2, and I divide by 2. So this leaves us with an x squared. And if we integrate 1, we simply get x. Now this is our integral answer. And in this answer, we're going to plug our upper and lower limit, 1 and 2 and 1 respectively. So first we're going to plug the upper limit in our first bracket. So wherever you see an x or wherever you see a variable, you're going to plug that upper limit. So we'll have 2 cubed over 3, which is 8 over 3, 2 squared, which is 4, and our plus 2 comes here. Now, minus sign, the second bracket, you're going to now plug the lower limit. So we have 1 cubed over 3, which is 1 over 3, 1 squared, which is 1, plus 1 goes here. So now you're going to evaluate each answer. You're going to have, in our first bracket, 8 over 3 plus 4 plus 2 gives you 26 over 3. Then the minus sign, because it says you subtract both answers, minus sign. Then from this bracket, a third plus 1 is 2 1/3, or 7 over 3. So when we subtract both answers, we get 19 over 3. In our second question, we have the integral from 0 to pi over 2 of sine 2x minus cos x dx, integrating with respect to x. Now, in an earlier video, we learned how to integrate trigonometric functions. So, when we integrate sine 2x, as you see here from previous, we're going to get, for sine 2x, we're going to get negative 1 over 2 cos 2x. Now, we're not going to put plus c at the end because we're dealing with the definite integral. So we're going to have negative 1 over 2 cos 2x, as you see here. And if we're going to now put back our minus sign, and when we integrate cos x, we get sine x. So we put that there. So now this is our integral function, which we're going to plug our lower and upper limit inside. Now, whenever we're dealing with trigonometric functions in calculus, our calculator has to be in radians. So you can set it up. So shift, set up. Here we have degrees, radians, and GRA. And for radians, on my calculator is number 4. So I press number 4 and it changes to an R. Okay, so like our previous example, we're going to first plug the upper limit into the position of the variable in our first bracket. So we have cos 2 times pi over 2. Now 2 times pi over 2 is simply pi. And then we're going to plug our pi in this position, so we have sine pi over 2 minus sine. Now in our second bracket, we're going to plug our lower limit, which is 0. So we have negative half cos 2 times 0 is 0 minus sine 0. And we're going to work each of these. Now first we're going to do cos pi. So we press cos pi, which is negative 1. So this answer is negative 1 so once more, cos pi. So we press cos pi, which is a negative 1. If you can see that, it's a negative 1. So we plug negative 1 in this space. Negative 1 times our negative half is a positive half. Then we put back our minus sign. Now we're going to do sine pi over 2. So sine pi over 2 gives us a positive 1. So in this place, we're going to put our positive 1. That's the bracket with our upper limit. Then we're going to put our minus sign. Then the lower limit. So we have cos 0, which is 1. Let me show you. Cos 0 is 1. So this is 1 times the negative half, which is a negative half. And sine 0 is 0, as you can see. So now, from the bracket with the upper values, negative half times negative 1 is a positive half, and then we put right back our minus 1. Now, minus sign goes back. Now we're going to the answer for the lower bracket. Negative half times 1 is a negative half. So these two negative signs together become positive. So now we have half minus 1, which is a negative half, plus half, which is 0. Negative half plus half, which is 0. Now, before I forget, whenever you're working with trigonometric functions in the calculus section, you have to make sure that your calculator is in radians. Here we have an R, you have to make sure it is in radians. So you can set up your calculator so that it's in radians. On my calculator, when I go to the setup, it's number 4, so I press number 4. So we have some questions that follow that we're going to work out together. So first question, the integral from 2 to 3 of 6x squared minus 1. So first step, we're going to integrate our f of x function. When we do that, we add 1 to our power of 2 to get 3 and divide by 3. And if we integrate a negative 1, we get a negative x. So now we're going to plug our upper limit and lower limit into the function 2x cubed minus x. So in our first brackets, we're going to plug our upper limit, which is 3. So we now have 2 times 3 cubed minus 3. Put back our minus sign, and now let's go to the lower limit, which is 2. So we have 2 times 2 cubed minus 2. When you work the bracket for the upper limit, 3 cubed is 27. 27 times 2 is 54. 54 minus 1 is 50. 54 minus 3, is 51. Now, minus sign goes back. Now for the lower bracket, 2 cubed is 8. 8 2 is 16, and 16 minus 2 is 14. So for our answer, 51 minus 14 gives us 37. Question B. The integral from negative 4 to 0 of x plus 4 all squared. Now, in this question, we have our function, our f of x function raised to power of 2. And in our in a previous video, we learned how to integrate such functions that are raised to a power. So here we have a linear function raised to a power. So what we do, if you recall, we add 1 to that power, so 2 plus 1 is 3, and we divide by 3, but that 3 that we divide by has to first get multiplied by the coefficient of x. Now in this case it's simply 1, so it makes our answer easier. So what we are going to divide, the function that we are going to plug our upper and lower limits in is x plus 2 all cubed over 3. So plugging in our upper limit, plugging in our upper limit, which is 0 in our first bracket, we have 0 plus 2 all cubed over 3 minus sine. Now for the lower limit, which is negative 4, will be negative 4 plus 2 all cubed over 3. So when we evaluate each bracket, this gives us 2 cubed, which is 8 over 3. Minus sign goes back. Negative 4 plus 2 is a negative 2, and if we cube negative 2, we get a negative 8, and we put it over our 3. So now our answer is 8 over 3 plus 8 over 3, which is 16 over 3. In our C question, we have the integral from negative 1 to 1 of the function 2x5 minus 3x4 plus 2x cubed all over x squared. Now, in order for us to evaluate this, we need to first simplify. And to do that, we give each function the same denominator of x squared and simplify. So 2x5 over x squared, when we are dividing, we subtract the powers. So this gives us 2x cubed, 5 minus 2 is 3. On this side, we have 3x, and 4 minus 2 is 2, so we get a 3x squared. And on this side, 2x, 3 minus 2 is 1, so we're left with just a 2x. So this is our function that we're going to integrate. So let's go ahead. We add 1 to the power of 3 to get 4 and divide by 4. We add 1 to the power of 2 to get 3 and divide by 3. This has already a power of 1, so when we add 1 to it, we get 2 and divide by 2. So now, the integral is half x to the 4 minus x cubed plus x squared. So this is what we're going to plug our upper and lower limit into. First, we're going to plug the upper limit. So we have half times 1 to the 4 minus 1 cubed plus 1 squared, as you see here. Minus sign. Now for the bracket with the lower limit, we plug negative 1 in place of the x. So we have half times negative 1 to the power of 4 minus negative 1 to the power of 3 plus negative 1 all squared. Now we're going to simplify each bracket. 1 to the 4 is 1, so that gives us a half. This is minus 1 and plus 1, so those cancel. Now for this bracket, first we put our minus sign, and now we go to this bracket. Negative 1 raised to a power of 4 is a positive 1, so 1 times half is half. Negative 1 cubed is a negative 1, so minus negative 1 makes this a positive 1. And if I square negative 1, I also get a positive 1. So now we have half from this upper bracket minus 1 plus 1 plus half, 2.5 in our lower bracket. So half minus 2.5 gives us a negative 2. In our fourth question, we have the integral from negative pi over 2 to pi over 4 of cos x. if we integrate cos x, we get sine x. So this sine x is where we're going to plug our upper and lower limit. First we plug the upper limit, so we have sine pi over 4 minus sine goes in the middle. Then we plug the lower limit, which is sine of negative pi over 2. Now for sine pi over 4, we go into our calculator. Sine of pi over 4 gives us root 2 over 2, and if you put that in decimal, it's 0.707, as you see here. Minus sine goes back. Now for sine of negative pi over 2. So sine of negative pi over 2 gives us a negative 1. So this is the minus sign that went back, and sine of negative pi over 2 is this negative 1. So the two negative signs together become a positive, and when added, our answer becomes 1.707. In our last question, we have the integral from 0 to pi over 2 of sine 3x minus cos 2x. Now if I integrate sine 3x, for sine 3x, I will get negative 1 over 3 cos 3x, as you see here. The minus sign goes back. And for cos 2x, I will get 1 over 2 sine 2x, as you see here. So now we have integrated our function. We can now plug in the upper and lower limit. First we plug the upper limit in place of the x. So this becomes 3 times pi over 2, 3 pi over 2, and 2 times pi over 2 is simply pi. So this is our upper bracket. Minus sign goes in the middle. Now for the bracket with the lower limit, 3 times 0 is 0, so we have cos 0 right here, and 2 times 0 is 0 once more, we have sine 0 there. So now to evaluate, go into our calculator, finding the value of cos 3 pi over 2. So cos 3 pi over 2 is 0. As you can see, 0. So this value is 0, and 0 times anything is 0. Minus sign goes back. Now let's find sine pi. Sine of pi is 0 as well. So this is 0 times half, which is still 0. So the answer for the upper bracket is 0. Minus sign goes back. Now let's go to the lower bracket. Now cos 0 is 1. Let me show you. Cos 0, let's say positive 1. So 1 times negative third is a negative third. Minus sign. Now let's find sine 0, which is 0. And so 0 times its half is again 0. So all we have to work with is this minus negative third. So two negative signs together makes it a positive 1 over 3.